Respect me, respect my family. This could be the new motto on the presidential seal. The Trump dynasty has begun. It was a great first week, a tremendous week for Steve Bannon and his new assistant, President Donald Trump. Donald was taking the blame, but the power behind the throne is increasingly attributed to Bannon, Trump's chief strategist and senior counselor. Bannon, the former executive chair of Breitbart News, far-right white supremacist tabloid news site, has pledged to help Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage tear down the European Union.
Mr. Bannon has made very strong statements against the EU, and I think it is very, very disappointing and dangerous that somebody who is a strategic advisor to the President of the United States seeks to destroy the very transatlantic relationship that has benefited both the US and its people and the EU and our citizens so much since we have worked together to strengthen it since World War II. So I am angry about these kinds of statements.
Trump made the statements that Brexit was a good thing. He sticks to that, and he now, apparently, he or his newly appointed administration are asking their European interlocutors which will be the next country to leave the European Union. I think this is outrageous, and as Juncker said, we don't go around calling on Ohio to leave the United States. So this is not the start of a good relationship between the United States and the European Union.
Ted Malloch, Trump's choice as the new US ambassador to the European Union, has compared the European Union to the Soviet Union, and he recently voiced his enthusiasm for the downfall of the euro and the EU.
Well, I had in a previous career a diplomatic post where I helped to bring down the Soviet Union. So maybe there's another union that needs a little taming.
He's going to hate living in Brussels.
To be honest, I think it's a tragedy. For the last 60-odd years, the United States of America have been broadly in favor of European unity and integration. It was very much in their interest as they saw it, but clearly this president now wishes to reverse that.
Europe, as Bannon and Malloch say it, are the official competition. Incapable of being a global military player to rival the US, Europe still has a larger population than the United States and massive economic capacity. Europe is therefore a challenger for international influence and corporate profit. A weak, fractured Europe can be more easily outplayed by the US.
Traditionally, one of the unifying forces on the far fringes of this parliament, be they the left or the right, was that Europe had to be a competitor to the United States. And I think if America goes around now under the Trump administration saying Britain goes to the front of the queue, we just want a bilateral relationship with Britain, we're not interested in what happens on the continent, we think the European Union's bad news. This is not going to make any friends, certainly amongst the 27.
Europe also represents a kind of existential challenge to the embryonic Trump administration. Despite its weakening of the rule of law, Europe continues to represent a virtuous beacon of liberty, equality, fraternity.
The importance of the transatlantic relation is significant. We have built a rules-based system, a multilateral system, a values-based cooperation since World War II, and I think we should not be too dismissive of what it would mean if that would change. But I'm worried about what I see from this new president. The statements he's made on protectionism, on NATO cooperation are certainly reason for concern and not reason for complacency. So we are on high alert of what's coming out of the White House.
America's clumsy, impractical and racist Muslim ban clearly runs counter to the optimism of give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. Angela Merkel has denounced the Muslim ban and continues to espouse the values enshrined in the American psyche. But if the European project flounders, so too does a model of communitarian solidarity. Europe will, like America, resort to a more dangerous individualism.
For me, as chair of the Libe Committee, the committee which deals with fundamental rights in the European Union, I see this policy as completely unfair, it's unprecedented, and it's a policy which targets countries on the basis of religion, and that cannot stand. Angela Merkel explained to the President of the United States that we abide by international law in the European Union, the Geneva Convention on Refugees. We do not, in our visa policy and other policies, deliberately target countries on the basis of the background and religion of a person. We have checks and balances. And we hope that all Western countries in this sense would have those values. But clearly, in this instance, that is not happening.
For days, the European Commission's president, the European Council's president, and the newly elected president of the European Parliament maintained a stony silence as 5-year-olds, the elderly, doctors, nurses, whole families were detained and deported without prior notice. The heartless process of ripping lives apart in the whim of a now contested executive order was condemned quickly by Angela Merkel, by the British Parliament, by millions of Americans, but the EU's presidents said nothing of substance until Donald Tusk finally wrote to the European Union's heads of state, noting the worrying declarations by the new American administration. Tusk put it bluntly but broadly, saying that the change in Washington puts the European Union in a difficult situation, with a new administration seeming to put into question the last 70 years of American foreign policy. Why were the EU's presidents so slow to respond? Were they afraid of offending Trump? Are they afraid of provoking Bannon? Do the leaders of the European Union really think that not offending the Commander-in-Chief will alter the course of his America First mantra? Is Europe about to kiss the hand of a new mafia godfather, a monarch who will demand that Europe respects him and respects his family?
We must all avoid that, because President Trump indeed acts like a bully, and everyone who has ever seen a schoolyard doesn't want the bullies to win. It's unfair, it leads to bad outcomes. You should never reward aggression, and usually when aggression starts and the others respond aggressively, it could lead to a race to the bottom.
How can Europe's leaders balance the economic necessity of good trade relations with America while at the same time fending off a challenge to Europe's very existence? Basically, how does Europe deal with the classroom bully?
At the end of the day, of course, the United States is also depending on some rules on an international level, because we have really close value chain, and even the United States have a big economy, they are not totally independent. So I hope that this minimum of rational politics will remain in the White House.
If we are speaking about the transatlantic cooperation, in particular with the TTIP, then for certain reasons there was a common interest to define it, but probably at the cost of all the partners. So we have to make compromises. And now he wants to make America first. That means the American interest is clearly defined. So we have to rethink what is the interest of the European Union.
TTIP looks dead as it is. Whether we can see something similar emerging from the ashes remains to be seen. It's too early to say. I mean, bizarrely, of course, now Britain's going to go to the front of the queue in a bilateral trade deal. How that's going to be possible given his protectionist instincts and that Britain exports more to America than America does to Britain. So if we have a total free trade agreement, we will be basically threatening American jobs, in his language. That remains to be seen. If we have this agreement, there will have to be a court to arbitrate and settle the disputes, which will result in a degree of supranational jurisdiction by unelected officials or judges. So, all the objections to TTIP will creep into the argument for a bilateral deal between Britain and the United States.
TTIP looks dead. Do you see any way back for TTIP now?
No, TTIP is dead, and I think it's totally clear that the new President of the United States is not interested in establishing a rule-based globalization management system. He wants the ruling of the power, and this is not in line with the European values. And so I think there is no real possibility of a comprehensive agreement with the United States at the moment.
The talks between the EU and the US are now in a deep freezer. And I don't know when they will be revitalized, but they are not dead either. But we'll have to see when the political leadership in the United States would come back to appreciating the importance of joint and rules-based approach to trade between us, which is still very, very important for both our economies and for our people, because a lot of jobs in Europe depend on trade and investment with the United States. A lot of jobs in the United States depend on good relations, trade relations with the EU.
In his first week as president, Donald Trump has succeeded in galvanizing a global movement convinced that his administration is set on the road to tyranny, and he will achieve tyranny by the very means Plato described 2,300 years ago. Surprisingly, Trump, a president that built his mystique on corporate success and widely viewed as a friend of business, is fast attracting strong criticism from the business community. Businesses such as Amazon, Google and Coca-Cola are no longer American businesses. They're global, staffed by immigrants and dependent on the goodwill of global consumers. They are now demonstrating a corporate conscience, and it is here that Europe is likely to play a key role. European consumers have real influence on the political voice of corporate giants. It's not just about purchase power, but the capacity to lobby boardrooms and shift stock prices. Trump's malevolent, protectionist, security and trade policies have already set off a boardroom backlash, with many high-profile firms and CEOs quick to denounce the Muslim ban and perceived lack of ethical governance.
The European Union should act as a global player, and we didn't need the election of Trump for that wake-up call. It is very important that we in the European Union are able to safeguard our own interests and our own values.
First of all, I think he will dominate American trade policies from the American point of view, so he is defining the interests. And I think that must be the precondition for reshaping the EU and US relationship, saying what are our interests.
For the European Union to deal with the new Trump era, two game plans are on the table. Bite our tongues and ride out the next 4 or 8 years, hoping that the damage isn't too great and that reasonable relations can be maintained. Given the hesitation of the 3 EU presidents, this seems to be the preferred choice. The alternative is that Europe rises as a bastion of resistance to racism and hate, fiercely fighting nationalism within and supporting those in America committed to a liberal democracy. With every outrageous executive order, Trump mobilizes a rebel alliance and gives Europe a clear enemy to mobilize around.
There are those, whether they're in the Kremlin or in the White House, who have very different thoughts about the value of an inclusive, diverse society based on human rights first and foremost. And I think we have to make sure that we can preserve what is important for us in Europe and not allow those bullies, whether they come from the East or the West, to undermine our collaboration and our common position in a world where indeed there are more threats to our unity and to our position in the world than there were in a long time.
This generation of pro-Europeans has been looking for a leader to define Europe and bind Europeans. Perhaps they never expected that this leader would be American and that they would define themselves in opposition to him.